As we talked about, the U.S. will be sending more military equipment to South Korea and Japan.
Korean official promised more, quote, gift packages for the United States if it doesn't back off. This after last weekend's test of an advanced nuclear device that the Kim Jong-un regime claimed was a hydrogen bomb. And amid reports, North Korea was moving yet another intercontinental ballistic missile to a launch site.
This as the West waits for another anticipated North Korean weapons test.
During an arms conference in Geneva, North Korea's envoy to the UN threatened the U.S. of more retaliatory actions in response to mounting pressure and isolations. Washington's side at the forum stood firm and warned such provocations will not be tolerated. Eugenie fills us in on the heated exchanges.
The wording was more subtle, at least by North Korean standards, but the message was clear. North Korea's ambassador to the UN, Han Dae-sung, said his country would send more gift packages to the U.S. if Washington continues to turn up the heat on the regime. Speaking at a UN arms conference in Geneva on Tuesday, the envoy said he was proud of Pyongyang's latest nuclear test, saying it's a necessary deterrent against perceived signs of hostility from the U.S.
The recent self-defensive measures by my country, DPRK, are a gift package addressed to none other than the U.S. The U.S. will receive more gift packages from my country as long as it relies on reckless provocations and futile attempts to put pressure on the DPRK.
Han stood defiant despite the wave of condemnation and growing isolation being faced by the regime, saying pressure and sanctions would be a futile and wasted effort in deterring his country. He ruled out the possibility of any talks on North Korea's denuclearization, saying Pyongyang's nuclear deterrent is a topic that is off-limits and non-negotiable in any future dialogue. Washington's ambassador to the UN, Robert Wood, responded by saying the regime's nuclear and missile programs were a threat to the entire world. He said North Korea can no longer be allowed to continue its violation of international law and that it was time for the global community to put its foot down once and for all.
Now is the time to say to the regime that provocations, threats, and destabilizing actions will no longer be tolerated.
We hope all relevant sides can make efforts to avoid an escalation of tensions.
That hope set aside as South Korea is flexing its own military muscle, staging a live-fire military exercise at sea, as President Trump agreed to substantially increase the sale of sophisticated military equipment to South Korea and Japan. And Washington agreed with Seoul to increase the payload limit on South Korea's missiles.
President Trump has announced that the United States is ready to sell high-tech military gear to South Korea and Japan to help them better deal with North Korea's threats.
We believe this will be useful for responding to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats.
Just a matter of days after North Korea claimed it has successfully tested a hydrogen bomb, President Trump took to Twitter to say he's allowing Seoul and Tokyo to buy a substantially increased amount of highly sophisticated military equipment from Washington. Although he did not elaborate on the kind of weaponry and equipment, the White House said President Trump is willing to approve the sale of military weapons and equipment worth many billions of dollars to Seoul. Concerns of potential radiation leak grows following Pyongyang's latest nuke test. To quell such fears, South Korea's Unification Ministry is keeping close watch for any signs of contamination. Lee Jung-yeon has the full story.
Following North Korea's 6th nuclear test on Sunday, the South Korean Unification Ministry said at a regular press briefing on Wednesday that they are on the lookout for any possible radiation leakage from the test site.
We are closely monitoring the situation, considering the severity of any potential radioactive contamination.
This follows speculation over possible collapse of a cavern beneath Mount Mantap at the Punggye-ri nuclear test site.
I believe it's quite probable that there might have been a release of radioactive material because we're talking about collapse and formation of a small crater. I would say that basically it really depends upon waterways underground, and it is quite possible that released to the underwater, and then that could have been released to the East Sea.
The expert added that it is a little too early to tell whether radiation would reach South Korea, but when it comes to China, the possibility is higher as the testing site lies close to the border. The latest nuclear test is North Korea's largest to date, and although South Korea's Nuclear Safety Agency said that it has detected no traces of radioactive materials upon conducting an aerial survey, experts say possibilities of other contamination pathways are open, so it may take some time before the full damage caused by the test can be known.
United Nations chief says North Korea nuclear threat is world's most serious. China and Russia oppose tougher North Korea sanctions. South Korea scrambles to improve weapons following North Korean test. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday called further sanctions a road to nowhere and warned military option could lead to a global catastrophe. China's foreign ministry Tuesday said the use of military force on the Korean peninsula is never an option.
President Moon Jae-in is in Vladivostok to attend a regional economic forum there. Top of his schedule was a bilateral summit with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Naturally, the central topic was North Korea issues. Moon Gun-young starts us off from the far eastern city.
Vladivostok, this beautiful port city in Russia's far east, sits the venue of the annual Eastern Economic Forum, now in its 3rd year. But as South Korean leader Moon Jae-in makes his debut on the Russian stage, it's his bilateral summits on the sidelines of the regional forum that's gaining the spotlight, especially as his visit comes on the heels of a powerful nuclear test by North Korea over the weekend. First on the itinerary for the 4-month-old South Korean president, an exclusive one-on-one with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Opening the talks, the South Korean leader raised the possibility of the situation on the Korean peninsula spinning out of control.
여기서 북한의 도발이 멈추지 않으면 이 통제할 수 없는 국면으로 빠져들 수도 있다고 생각합니다. 그래서 북한의 도발을 멈추게 하고 북한 문제를 근원적으로 해결하기 위한 그런 방안도 함께 모색하기를 희망합니다.
The Russian president, who derided increased sanctions as useless and ineffective a day earlier, welcomed the opportunity to discuss North Korea with the South Korean leader.
I'm glad to have an opportunity to meet with you today and discuss problems of our concern related to well-known events related to North Korea's nuclear program, missile program, and of course, to discuss our bilateral relations.
At a joint media conference following a 3-hour-long meeting,
우리 두 정상은 국제사회의 거듭된 경고에도 불구하고 지난주 북한이 6차 핵실험을 강행한 것을 강력히 규탄하며
Russia does not recognize and will never recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. North Korea's nuclear test is a flagrant violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Although South Korean President Moon said his Russian counterpart expressed his full support for South Korea's efforts to, quote, tame North Korea, Mr. Putin said there is no sense of pushing North Korea into a corner as
pressure and sanctions alone cannot solve the situation on the Korean peninsula. Without political and diplomatic tools, it is absolutely impossible to make headway in the current North Korea situation.
The two leaders did agree that the rest of the world must guide Pyongyang back to the dialogue table, but a hint of difference in exactly how that should be done.
The South Korean president asked for Russia's cooperation in ratcheting up the level of UNSC sanctions on North Korea by cutting off its crude oil supply. The Russian president said no matter how strongly it is pressured, North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons, and expressed concern that severing Moscow's limited oil supply to Pyongyang will impact hospitals in North Korea and the ordinary people there.
As geopolitical tensions escalate in and around the Korean Peninsula, South Korean President Moon Jae-in continues to reach out for global support in solving the North Korea problem. First up Thursday morning is another bilateral summit, this time with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Reporting from Vladivostok, Russia, Moon Geon-young, ARIRANG News.
Russia and China say steps to further tighten sanctions against North Korea in the wake of its latest nuclear test would do little to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula. The two also warned about the dangers of military intervention. Russian President Vladimir Putin Tuesday said tougher sanctions were senseless and would not change the leadership in Pyongyang. Such moves, Putin said, would lead to large-scale human suffering. Putin also warned of a global catastrophe if what he called military hysteria around North Korea continues to increase. Putin spoke to reporters in Xiamen, China, at the conclusion of a leaders' summit of the BRICS group of 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Although Chinese President Xi Jinping was silent on the issue when he spoke to media and during the summit, perhaps missing an opportunity for Beijing to play a bigger role in resolving the crisis, Russian President Putin was not. At a press conference where he took questions from journalists, Putin clearly laid out Russia's views on North Korea, as well as a wide